Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks very much indeed for joining this bite-size presentation organised by the Australian Critical Communications Forum. Let me start just by explaining who the Australian Critical Communications Forum is. Essentially, we're a chapter of the Global Critical Communications Association, and we're passionate about standards-based innovations in critical communications. The ACCF is a little unique in that we represent all market participants, users, industry, and regulators and standards bodies. We mainly work on bringing international experience to Australia and New Zealand for the benefits of our local critical communications organisations. And of course, we take innovations from Australia and New Zealand globally. Recently, we've had presentations from a number of Australian market participants to Critical Communications Broadband Group, the Critical Communications World, and a number of other forums. We're passionate about participation, as I said, and we're always keen to get new members. For any of you wishing to join and participate in our activities, please take a look at our website for affordable options for joining. So today we've got a very exciting lineup of speakers. You'll see from the agenda that we have James Corkill from the New South Wales Telco Authority, Peter Hudson, Chief Technology Officer from Sapura, and I should say for Peter, he's up in the middle of the night. He's talking from the UK. Peter Scarlata, Chief Executive Officer of Simico Wireless Solutions, Dion Stevenson, Product Manager Unified Solutions from Tate, Dr. Rob Joyce, Chief Technology Officer from Nokia Oceania, Ranjan Bhagat, Vice President and GM of Zetron, and Kevin Graham, ACCF Director, and congratulations to Kevin, he's also the elect CEO for the Critical Communications Association. So rather than waste any more time, I'll hand over to James to begin today's presentations.
Thanks very much, Roger. Look, let me just start by saying thank you to the ACCF, Roger and his team, and the TCCA for setting up today's series, bite-sized presentations, some really awesome presenters. So really looking forward to this session. Just give me a second here and I'll take us through to the next slide. So look, thanks for having me today. I'm James Corkill, the Chief Technology Officer at the New South Wales Telco Authority, and I'm going to provide an update on critical communications from a New South Wales perspective, an update and overview. So just to kick off with, who is the New South Wales Telco Authority? I'm sure some of you are familiar with who we are and what we do, but for those who aren't, we are the responsible agency for delivering critical communications, in particular the public safety network for frontline emergency services within New South Wales. We're also responsible for the implementation of the New South Wales Government Operational Communications Strategy, which we relaunched in 2020. The strategy covers operational communications and also extends to statewide connectivity initiatives, including the associated technology roadmaps. So with the theme of today's bite-sized event, I'm going to touch on a couple of our major programs, or provide an update on a couple of our major programs and projects, some of our recent achievements and innovations in products and services, some future innovation opportunities, and I'm really excited to touch on the launch of our Connectivity Innovation Network, which is an opportunity for engagement with the government, with industry and academia on solving some of our most challenging problem statements across the state. However, before I jump into this, and given the theme of today's sessions, I wanted to take the opportunity to look back on events over the last couple of years. Just go back one, sorry. So critical communications, what is it? Why is it important? I think, as you can see here, the context over the last couple of years for critical communications It's certainly been a busy time for our frontline emergency services staff. And I wanted to pause to say thank you to all of those full-time and also volunteer staff who have helped keep our community safe and protected through these periods. You know, these are the people who are running towards a bushfire, who are, you know, wading through floodwaters while we're all running the other way. So hats off. And look, by extension, I think with a number of events that we've had in recent times, this has created a really busy operational period for those involved in the provision of critical communications, not only across our state, but also within the region and globally. I'll kick off with a bit of an overview on each of these events. The 2019 bushfire season will definitely be remembered as one of the worst in living memory. We saw multiple large fire fronts across the state, including multiple instances of mega fires where fire fronts combined. These fires raged for 8 months with over 10,000 fire incidents. They burned through 5.5 million hectares of land, which is an area larger than the size of Switzerland, destroyed over 2,000 homes and resulted in the tragic loss of 26 lives in New South Wales alone. On some days, the air quality was hazardous. The fires made Sydney the most polluted city in the world. It's unbelievable stuff. The 1920 bushfire season also created an intense operational period for support of the public safety network, including over 8 PSN sites damaged. 2 sites were completely destroyed, but many more saved through the intervention of the firefighting agencies. We were able to fast track and operationalise 24 new radio sites to support the emergency response. We had the deployment of over 30 cell on wheels and over 140 generator deployments. Ultimately, the thing that eventually put the fires out was rain, but it didn't arrive steadily. It arrived in torrents on parched baked land and resulted in floods that saw 87 homes destroyed, over 5,000 destroyed or damaged structures, and tragically 2 lives lost. While the State Emergency Service were attending to calls for assistance, over 18,000 evacuations and multiple flood rescues, the Telco Authority team were again engaged ensuring continued communications for our customers. With 19 sites impacted by mains power failure during this period and 28 site access tracks blocked or damaged, we were still able to fast track and operationalise an additional 9 new radio sites. We assisted with 2 cell and wheel deployments and maintained site operations with 3 generator deployments. Somewhat ironically, as I stand here or sit here today, we are again engaged in support of our ESOs with the current flood response in regional New South Wales and have a live operation with multiple mobile assets deployed. As if these 2 incidents wasn't enough, in parallel, there's been the ongoing mouse plague across much of regional New South Wales and the overlay of the pandemic, something I'm sure I don't need to touch on or explain today. So this context, I think, is really important for us. With longer, more intense bushfire periods, increases in the regularity and severity of storms and other weather phenomena, and the continued and increasing expectations on law enforcement and ambulance services to support citizens, enabling efficient operations for emergency services with high quality, reliable, and innovative communications solutions will continue to be of utmost importance now and into the future. We are focused on delivering this through 4 major initiatives, which I'll touch on today: the Critical Communications Enhancement Program, Public Safety Mobile Broadband, our Operate and Maintain transformation and implementation of our Connectivity Innovation Network. So firstly, the Critical Communications Enhancement Program. We are undertaking an expansion of our P25 network via our Critical Communications Enhancement Program. This program is expanding the footprint and enhancing the performance of the public safety network for emergency services. We've committed over $1.4 billion to expand this network, which will increase the coverage to 99.7% of the state's population and 85% geographic coverage. We currently have 308 operational sites in the network and recently hit a milestone of 96% population coverage and 42% geographic coverage. At completion, the program will deliver a total site count of 675 sites across our state. This network deployment creates a foundational infrastructure for the delivery of our current services, but also future products and services. But we're not just building sites, we're building resilience. This has always been a key tenet of our network design philosophy, but reinforced with recent lived experiences. What we've learned during bushfires, floods, and other weather events is that the worst affected areas can often be offline with power not restored for 4, 5, or possibly more days. Often the electrical infrastructure or other associated infrastructure is damaged and access for restoration can be unsafe. This has driven our focus on ensuring maximum site autonomy is being designed into the network. This helps us achieve our target availability of 99.95%. Our grid-powered sites are designed to have a minimum of 10 hours battery backup. Hard-to-access sites and key hubs are designed to have up to 32 hours, and our most remote solar sites will have up to 120 hours of designed autonomy. In addition to the resilience measures, we've been investing heavily in expanding our fleet of cell on wheels and mobile generators, as I touched on earlier. These can be deployed to any affected site across the state as required to ensure continued service delivery. By mid next year, we'll have 32 cell on wheels and similar mobile assets and over 30 generators and other backhaul supporting technologies. In parallel to this, we are enhancing our operational support environment and have uplifted our operational support agreements. These agreements and the associated operational transformation go hand in glove with our ability to effectively deliver the services our customers require. While we continue to roll out and enhance our existing services for the PSN through these major programs, we're cognizant of the demand for data from our customers to support their day-to-day operations. So in parallel, we are running a public safety mobile broadband program to deliver broadband for emergency services. So I know many of you are familiar with PSMB, so I won't go into the background, but I will touch on where we're currently at. In 2018, the Council of Australian Governments came together to announce support for a national public safety mobile broadband capability. The Prime Minister announced funding for a PSMB trial and to set up a national PMO. The national PSMB program has 6 work streams, 3 of which are led by New South Wales. One of these includes the proof of concept for PSMB, which I'll touch on today. In March 2021, New South Wales, on behalf of all jurisdictions, signed a contract with Nokia to deliver the proof of concept for PSMB. Nokia, alongside partners Optus and TPG, are helping to develop a test LTE technology that will inform the design and development of the PSMB delivery model. The proof of concept began in May this year, and it will run until August 2022, with testing being conducted for the lab through to production networks. This testing will also include representatives from the emergency services conducting specific test cases, along with interoperability testing to inform future transition strategies. The results of the trial will be used to help inform the design and development of the national PSMB delivery model. So I've touched on our 2 or 3 current major programs, but it's still not enough. We know, and I'm sure many of you know as well, our customers, the emergency services and other critical communications users, they want coverage, they want reliability, and they want it everywhere, all of the time. Critical communications is no different, except sometimes these requirements mean the difference between life and death. So both of the major programs I've touched on today are focused on terrestrial network delivery. They endeavour to deliver coverage that is seamless and resilient. However, it is time-consuming and costly, particularly in areas as big as New South Wales, as you can see from this photo here. This extends to Australia and many other parts of the globe. So we need to get smarter with how we deliver services to our customers. And there are 3 areas of opportunity that we are focusing on. The first of these is interoperability through network interconnections, be it government to government, government to commercial, or other. The second is network of networks, leveraging existing alternative bearer solutions, Wi-Fi, satellite, commercial networks, and integrating those with the services that we provide through LMR. Finally, the innovation and developments that we're starting to see through non-terrestrial 3GPP standardised solutions to deliver connectivity direct to standard mobile devices. And I'm going to touch on each of these areas in a little bit more detail. Our vision is to deliver bearer agnostic connectivity across the state, independent of device and location, and these technologies hold a great deal of promise for this. The obvious extension of this is that these innovations also have the potential to enhance our citizen connectivity across the state, Australia, and the world. So let's touch on interoperability. I'm pleased to share that we at the Telco Authority have successfully delivered the first P25 interconnectivity project across Australian jurisdictions. This was done in collaboration with our counterparts who run Queensland's government wireless network. A roaming agreement and connection between our core networks has been established. ESOs on both sides can now benefit from coverage extending beyond their own networks and a seamless experience when they undertake mission-critical cross-border operations. The next logical extension to this is interconnectivity of networks to commercial operators. Whilst this exists today to support some of our over-the-top applications, we cannot yet ensure the same quality of service to support seamless communication between LMR and broadband. This integration, in addition to fostering the application and device ecosystem that enable broadband services, is a key cornerstone of our technology roadmap and future state. The second innovation I touched on was vehicle as a node. One approach we've taken to addressing some of the challenges of this connectivity everywhere challenge is through the introduction of this technology. We've integrated 2 supply products to our network, and these allow users to communicate on public safety network talk groups outside of our PSN terrestrial network coverage. The vehicle as a node solution leverages multiple technologies such as Wi-Fi, P25, commercial networks, satellite, depending on availability and usage cost. This means our vehicle as a node customers, once the vehicle is set up, can have access to public safety network talk groups almost anywhere in the state. A really great initiative for our customers. While we continue to innovate and extend our products and services, the challenge presented to all of us with the digital divide for general citizen connectivity of critical communications still exists. Take the example of Winnering, 1,000 kilometres from Sydney, a population of 140 and 1 single police officer. How can we ensure this police officer has the same service and connectivity to dispatch as his CBD colleagues? This is where I believe new technologies such as non-terrestrial, satellite-based connectivity that is standardised can truly be game-changing. We're keen to continue engaging with industry to innovate in this space, and I'm excited to announce that as of last Friday, we have established the Connectivity Innovation Network. As I said, I'm excited to announce that as of Friday, the New South Wales Telco Authority has appointed the University of Technology Sydney and Sydney University as joint leads to run the newly formed Connectivity Innovation Network. The network will bring together government, industry and research organisations to find innovative solutions to connectivity challenges and prototype solutions. We've already created 4 problem statements that we've put to the Connectivity Innovation Network, and we've set aside $1 million in funding for 2 potential trials in 2022. So for anyone who's on the line or listening and you're interested, please reach out and engage on these or other potential problem statements and get in contact with the network. Thanks very much for your time today. It's been a privilege to present. Really looking forward to continue collaborating, as I said, through the Connectivity Innovation Network to help solve some of our tricky connectivity problems. Thanks, Roger.
Thanks very much, James. That was really impressive. I actually had no idea of the scale of investment or the focus on innovation that was happening in your program. It's really great. Just to attendees, we are going to entertain questions, but in order to keep the presentations kind of running to time, we'll deal with the questions at the end. but by all means make a note of them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen as we go through, so that they're not forgotten. So thank you again, James. I would like to move on now to introduce Peter Hudson. Peter is the Chief Technology Officer of Sapura, and he'll be talking to us about a European perspective on the transition from TETRA to mission critical LTE. Thanks, Peter.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. I think I can get the slides in order. Okay, maybe not. Okay, sorry, good, right. So I'm doing for the UK, there's a bit of a delay, so I'll try and get it right. Okay, so good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for the intro. I think we've been asked today to talk about a European perspective on the transition from TETRA, which is obviously the predominant technology being used in public safety for mission critical comms, and moving towards mission critical LTE. So we've only got 15 minutes. It's quite a large topic, so I'll try and cover the key points as we go through. Okay, so just to kind of a bit of a kind of positioning statement, I guess. So Sapura, as I guess, is traditionally known for TETRA terminals, so TETRA devices within the market. We've been doing that for quite some time. But realistically, it's broadband is part of our evolution. We're actually a mission critical communications company. TETRA happens to be the predominant standard at the moment, which is where we do most of our business. We're actually the leading TETRA terminal supplier to public safety worldwide at the moment. And we actually have, this is probably slightly out of date, almost 2.5 million radios supplied into critical communication users' hands and actually using them today all around the world. So Europe, Australasia, USA, South America, etc. So quite a wide user base with varying requirements, and also across not just public safety, also transportation, security, industrial applications, things like mining, oil and gas, etc. So all of those industries still need critical communications, whether it's narrowband or broadband. We bring, we think, quite a lot of experience into this field. We've got a very deep knowledge of mission critical user needs and requirements, and we always continue to talk to our end users to find out what they want, how they're using equipment, and how we can obviously generate solutions for them for that. So it's one of our key things, is that continuous innovation within the mission critical space, and that doesn't slow down at all. In fact, I'd say if anything, it's currently speeding up in terms of how people are using the equipment to do that. But we've got a lot of experience over 30 years, longer than I've been in the business, in developing critical communication standards. So we're involved at the very beginning with the TETRA standard, and are still very much involved in developing that, and there's still new developments going on with that currently, new features and facilities within the standard. But we also have been involved from the very, very early days with 3GPP and the MCPTT standardization, which we saw as very key to being involved in that, not just so we understood what was actually going to be produced, but also to influence that, to make sure that what was actually going to standards was the correct functionality and the correct level of functionality that our users want, and everybody else's as well. And that's been quite a long journey, I would say, in getting there. There's been certainly some misconceptions, some quite big differences across the globe, how the USA sees public safety functionality compared to how Europe does, etc. So it has been a very worthwhile sort of, if you like, endeavour to do that. And we're still currently very deeply involved in that. It's still progressing, and there are still amendments and additions going into that. So I think James has actually set up this very nicely. He did a very, I think, made a very sort of clear case for the need for mission critical comms. It's unfortunately a growing need. It's not going away at all. We have terrorist incidents, we have natural disasters, we've got COVID all around the world. And these things don't seem to decrease in volume, but actually increase. And so the need for mission critical comms is becoming more and more. Plus, we're seeing, I would say, critical national infrastructure, so power, water, all the utilities, etc., also becoming part of, if you like, the mission critical infrastructure. So it's a, if you like, a sort of a growing need. But it's kind of worth just a bit of a recap on what actually does mission critical mean. And for me, it's always on communications. So whenever you want to communicate, you can, regardless of where you are or what you're doing. And that really boils down to, as I said, a bullet points here, but making sure we have resilient comms, both on the networks and the devices. So they're designed to be real-time, mission critical. They don't fail when you need them. You can always rely on that. Coverage is a key issue. Again, James highlighted this with a very, very great picture showing sort of the vast sort of amount of area we're going to cover within Australia. We probably in Europe have different coverage issues, and that we have obviously much smaller landmass, but some of the terrain is quite difficult, and again, population is very dense, so getting the correct amount of coverage can be quite difficult at times. But networks need to be designed for that. Focus very much on group-oriented services as well, which is different to your standard, if you like, broadband or LTE network. And also designed for command and control, so preemption rather than queuing and blocking. So regardless of what you're trying to do, your call will get through, whether it preempts or it's queued and then gets through to be sort of dealt with if it's a lower priority call. So I think that's very important to make sure that happens so you don't lose calls. But also very importantly is the whole ecosystem currently is controlled by end user organizations. So they have full control over who is using them, what they can do, the security of it, and that is a very, very important point of how they run their networks. And obviously the networks, I think this is worldwide, but certainly in Europe, everything is secured to national security standards. So each government body and the EU in general applies certain security standards to all of the mission critical networks. So we have to meet those standards within the network equipment and also within the terminals as well. And the functionality is rich. I would never call any of these mission critical networks just walkie-talkies networks. They have a lot of very sophisticated functionality, both voice and data, and they have been over the years tailored more and more to users' needs. So we have a lot of tailoring in products that really fit precisely how people use those products. So they're not generics or off-the-shelf products necessarily. And one of the key things is fallback options as well, and direct mode services. So again, whatever the situation is, wherever you're working, whether there's been a major natural disaster, that still needs communications. So that could be, if you like, on-site, so the cows, things like that, or direct mode services. So that's incredibly important to make sure everything is available as much as possible to get that always on communications. As I've mentioned, TETRA is the predominant technology within Europe that's providing that at the moment for all of the public safety organisations. And its catchphrase is trusted, always, everywhere, which kind of summarises, if you like, mission critical communications. And it's very important we continue that through into the mission critical broadband technologies that we're going to use for the future. So continuing with TETRA might seem a little bit odd in the sense of talking about broadband, but after 20 years, TETRA still is the de facto choice for mission critical comms in Europe. We're still seeing only very recently new network put in, so a replacement TETRA network to replace an older one as a major national infrastructure. And all of the existing TETRA networks are planned to be operational for many years. So there is no plan to switch them off in the near term. We're still seeing a new network being rolled out in Europe, the new networks around the world being rolled out. New devices are still being launched. We launched one last year. One of our competitors launched one this year. So there still is that innovation, products are still being brought out. But with the products on the networks, there is a change occurring. Certainly, mission critical users have largely, at least to start with, the TETRA relied on voice and still do rely on voice being, if you like, the primary means of communication. but the use and operation of those devices and networks is evolving to encompass more and more data services and applications. And I think it's actually right that there's a lot of thought at the moment about what they want to take forward from what they have into the broadband era. But there is starting to be more and more thought of what people want in the broadband era that they possibly could now do today with the devices they have, and are actually starting to implement some of those applications and data services to actually blend those products almost into their working practices, which is very important. And a lot of those applications actually aren't really broadband. They don't need an awful lot of data. They can be supplied on TETRA. But again, as they're starting to be embedded in working practices, they can be carried forwards into the broadband world. But equally, TETRA networks are being complemented by commercial broadband overlays. So most of our customers in public safety have some sort of commercial broadband capability already today, and I think they're fairly ubiquitous across the world. So what are the challenges in Europe? I actually don't think they're very different from anywhere else in the world in reality. There are challenges for certain, but I think if I was to list them out, the first three are spectrum. I think we're in no different situation to most of the world, but spectrum is very, very tight in Europe. A lot of the spectrum that public safety would certainly like to use, we're in the 700 meg bands, has largely been already auctioned off to commercial operators. And so there is still, I think, a lot of thought going on within European governments about how they deploy with either limited spectrum or sharing of spectrum. And the availability of any spectrum varies across a lot of countries. So in the UK with ESN, there is absolutely no spectrum at all in addition to the commercial spectrum. So they are piggybacking on a commercial network as an MVNO, essentially, but with no additional spectrum for public safety added to that. Whereas in other European countries, they have small amounts of spectrum, 3+3 meg or 5+5, which they're using to augment the commercial networks as well and give them either priority access in certain areas or just infill into areas where there is currently no communications available with the commercial networks. So it's a bit of a mixed picture, but largely starved of spectrum at the moment. And there's a lot of work going on to look at what spectrum could be made available in the sort of 600 meg, certainly spectrum below 700 to see if there are better options there. But again, that won't become available in 2030. So there's quite some time before those are made available. So at the moment, there are small amounts of 700 meg and some higher that are being used or being proposed to be used for new broadband capabilities. User expectations are also incredibly high. And the TETRA services they have provide a very, very good service, a very reliable service. And so it's really important that the service that they get with the new broadband capability is as good. But also, I think it's actually ensuring that users trust the service. If they don't trust the service, they won't use it. And it's getting that those expectations set, moving from something that is very mature and very, very reliable and does exactly what they want, tailored to what they want, to move to a new technology. They want exactly the same. And that means exactly the same in terms of reliability, availability, and hopefully additional capabilities on top of that. Interoperability is also a big factor. A lot of the projects that are starting or going on at the moment are all looking at how they can mix and match capabilities. So not to be tied, if you like, monolithically to one supplier. So can they get servers, MCX servers from one supplier, clients from different ones, devices, network equipment, etc. And if you like, mix and match the best bits together to get the best solution they can. But also ensuring that actually there's a vibrant ecosystem there to make sure that there is security of supply. So if one supplier decides either not to advance what they're doing or perhaps exit the industry, then there are others that can take the place as well. So it's all about, again, security, but also that interoperability. So you can always depend on being able to buy equipment, put it together, and it working. Also, robustness and hardening of the mission critical standards. So I think ESN is certainly the first and leading the way in Europe in terms of its progress on providing mission critical networks, and they have been, if you like, finding the holes in the standards, the quirks, etc. And those things need to be ironed out to give us again stable user expectations. Meet those on the way. Hardening the LTE networks that are already there, very important. They're not good enough as they are to become mission critical. They need to be hardened, whether it's additional power supplies, communication links, etc. Very important. The other things, availability of devices. It has been hard to create devices with chipset availability, having mission critical features. That's something that is very, very important. Starting to ease up now, starting to become possible, but still a very sort of sparse amount of devices available at this point in time. And direct mode. One of the things, certainly with a lot of our users across Europe, is they won't actually deploy unless they have direct mode. So if they lose networks, whatever, they must have communications. And that's been a very thorny issue. And just to move on to that, it's been very clear that ProSA, which is the, if you like, the 3GPP standard for direct mode, is not going to be available or suitable for users' needs at the moment. The range is very low. The transmit power is only 0.2 watts, which is not going to give long range, whatever happens. But also the commercial LTE chipset suppliers at this point in time are not adding ProSA into their chipsets. So you can't make a device with it in, essentially. So other alternatives need to be found, really. In the timescale for deploying the first network, certainly there's going to be nothing that will be available from ProSA. Perhaps 5G, but we need to see. So across most European countries, not all use TETRA, there are one or two don't, but most do, then they're going to be staying with the existing TETRA technology. Certainly in Europe, that spectrum for direct mode in TETRA is actually harmonized across all the countries, so cross-border roaming, etc. becomes very easy. And it's also a very proven method of doing sort of device-to-device communications. So two real ways of doing this potentially. One is a dual mode device, so both technologies within a single device, and that obviously can be done, and there's some instances out there of that already today in some devices. The other aspect is what we call dual operation, where we actually repurpose an existing TETRA device to operate essentially as a remote speaker mic for an MCX device. So it could be a standard smartphone linked via Bluetooth or a cable USB. And that TETRA device can run in two modes. Either as an RSM mode and provide, if you like, a ruggedized device that can be worn on the body outside with big loudspeaker, big PTT. But when you need to use direct mode, single button press switches it back into TETRA mode again, and you can use direct mode directly from the same device, same user interface. And it's also a common interface for when people are migrating. There's also, if you like, it eases the transition across the way. And it can also be used obviously in TETRA trunk mode as well. So again, during migration, if there are needs to switch backwards and forwards, then it gives some options as well. So two possible ways forward to using TETRA in the sort of short to medium term with MCX. But it's all about getting the balance right. Hybrid solutions, I think most countries are certainly looking at bringing their mission critical LTE capability online alongside their TETRA solutions. And some of those will be working, TETRA solutions we already know will be working until at least 2030. And they're planning to, again, into working functions, bind them together and make sure we've got seamless communications across all those networks. So that those complementary broadband overlays are starting to be built. They're using shared services, as I said, and then we'll see them be connected into the TETRA systems, and we'll start seeing a build-up of both the mission-critical solutions alongside TETRA, and at some point, probably more towards 2030, we'll see a migration for some of those solutions fully onto LTE. But in the meantime, building of the mission critical LTE networks, the hardened versions are things that are starting to happen now in 2 or 3 countries. And that I think we'll see build a bit of momentum over the next few years across the whole of Europe. But again, Testing is very important, ensuring the mission critical KPIs and the service is robust to maintain the trust of the users is essential when we're building new communications, because regardless of what the technology is, user safety, always on access to communication is still absolutely vital. And just as a reality check here, sorry, I'm running a little bit behind. In Finland, last year, in fact, the project actually went under a 2-year delay because they actually started testing some of the equipment, some of the MCX services, looked at the hardening of the LT networks and realized that actually everything wasn't ready today. And that, again, the users had expressed opinions about, if you like, the level of maturity of the technology, and there's been delays put into that to make sure that actually that now they are looking to start their migration probably in 2026, 2027, rather than 2024, which is the original plan. So realism setting in terms of what can be done and when, to make sure that there really is a proper mission critical service. So very quickly, what's Sapura doing? We're remaining very active in 3GPP. We're engaged with actually several ongoing broadband projects at the moment, but we're also building devices and options with a full ecosystem, so handheld, vehicle devices, mobile device management, accessories, very important, and MCX applications as well. And we're looking at dual mode options in all the products, so we can cater for the need for device-to-device or migration, depending on the user's needs. And we're putting those out in what we think the timeline for those markets are. The first one was actually launched, I think, 3 weeks ago now. So this is a vehicle device, and what we're trying to do is distill what we understand from our current TETRA vehicle devices today and bring them into a product which supports broadband, but without any compromises in terms of what users are expecting from a vehicle device today, along with accessories as well, of course, very important. So our vehicle device, SU3, designed a lot of flexibility, has mission critical LT inside it. It runs Android inside the device, so it's not just a router. You can actually run your mission critical applications directly on it. Has a very powerful processor inside. Lots of storage, so real applications can actually sit and run on it with a lot of data there. It's 256 GB of storage inside. Obviously wireless LAN, Bluetooth, Ethernet. It supports dual displays, so front and back of vehicles for things like paramedic vehicles or fire tenders. It has the option of a second LT bearer, so we can run on 2 networks at the same time. One could be commercial, one could be mission critical, but keeping the data separate, but also an optional TETRA bearer as well. So we can actually, within that box, within the same footprint as our current TETRA devices, we can have both broadband and narrowband operating at the same time. So we think that gives a very, very powerful solution to what people need now and how they'll migrate into their full mission critical sort of functionality in the future. We're also providing device management, very important to make sure we can actually deploy the devices, upgrade software, make sure they're secure, enforce policies, etc. on the way as well. And again, providing patches, OS updates, making sure everything is absolutely secure is critical for mission critical users. We really can't have them using devices where there's security flaws within that. And then overall accessories as well, device-to-device solutions. A lot of our accessories that we use for our TETRA products, we will be carrying forward and using in our new broadband products. So we will hopefully have a full solution and ecosystem for the broadband future. Okay, thank you. I think that's the end of my presentation.
Thanks very much indeed, Peter. That was really interesting. I think there's a lot that potentially we can learn from the pioneering experience in Europe, both in Finland and with the ESN.
Yeah.
It's also pretty interesting that you asked the question or raised the question of spectrum. In Australia, the ACMA has just recently come out with a variety of options for using some spectrum relinquished from the NBN direct wireless, which basically the 2 options were either to release to the existing mobile operators or to release on an apparatus license-based system to private operators. ACCF did put in a submission which strongly favoured the latter. foster innovation. Thanks very much.
No problem.
I won't ask you necessarily to stay up unless you want to for the question and answer at the end. So if
I'll be around for it.
Yeah. Around? Cool. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Okay. Our next speaker is Peter Scarlata. Peter's going to talk about transition as well, but more from a DMR based to LTE. So Peter, over to you.
No, thank you, Roger. Really appreciate it. So for all of you who don't know me, I am Peter Scarlata and I'm the CEO of Smoko Australasia. As I'm certain that you're all aware, Smoko is a global product integration company and product company with a long-standing heritage, been over 80 years, and I want to thank you for attending my CC Brightside and my view on the transition of not just DMR, but also narrowband to LTE solutions. So if we can get, there we go. All right, so I'd like to start this discussion by considering where we've come from as an industry. And if we think about narrowband LMR with this longevity since the 1920s and during World War II, it has successfully provided communications effectively over the decades. The key to success has been the ability to provide communications over vast distances, resilience to continue to operate under adverse conditions, and providing one-to-many communications and the reliability needed to be used by public service agencies, the military, and critical business operations such as mining. However, this technology has moved with the times and successfully integrated data requirements, but is limited by the laws of physics and the bandwidth it can provide, obviously. With developments such as DMR Tier 3, Unified Single Block Data, or USBD for short, we have been successful in constantly squeezing more out of a 12.5 kilohertz channel, but it's just not enough. However, there are times when there is either a user may be at the fringe of a private radio network coverage and may need to progress onto another medium to continue their voice communications, or have greater data requirements for real-time video streaming, etc. What we're seeing in the market across almost all sectors these days is that PMR still definitely has its place and will for some time to come. However, the need to incorporate LTE and even satellite into our solutions is here to stay, as our clients at the market are requiring fast, real-time data to conduct their activities. And we're definitely seeing that also from NSW, Telco, and Sapura have the same mindset as well. So we're predicting over the next several years that our broadband solutions will grow exponentially to support our customers' needs for data intelligence. And this is why here at Smoko, we call it the concept of converged networks is front and center to our strategy. So converged networks, from what we see, are needed because as a society, we have a hunger for immediate data to solve a myriad of current day problems. One example is the smart ambulance scenario, where a patient has been picked up and the doctors in the hospital want to know what symptoms are being presented whilst en route to determine the right course of treatment ahead of time. Another use case, a bit more commercial in this mode, is a delivery driver who wants to be provided his or her real-time route planning and to deliver their parcels and to be able to prove that the parcels have been delivered by photos being sent to their client. Or we have the very well-known scenario by us here at Smoko. We have the bushfire commander who is in the field and wants to be able to see what direction a fire is travelling in relation to his firefighters, or his or her, I should say, and in order to plan the best way to extinguish the blaze by their team of firefighters. So with these exciting technologies that are now available, the convergence of LMR and broadband has never been more critical, and our industry must continue to evolve and adapt. So what does a converged network look like? So here at Smoko, by interactions with many of our customers, we see three levels. Firstly, we see mission critical data voice over LMR, which will remain, as I've mentioned, for years to come. However, MCPTT definitely has its place and is progressing, which is good to see. Narrowband is still a very important part of our portfolio, providing many of our customers with both mission critical and cost-effective data solution transfer. We have such solutions from the largest power companies in the UK for narrowband Scarlata to cancel GPS operations here in Australia who use a lot of these types of systems. However, what we're seeing through our new velocity range, which I'll speak about in a moment, is the thirst of data as well as onboard intelligence is required to absolutely improve efficiencies. And it doesn't always have to be a mission critical requirement, but we're seeing more and more of that coming on board as well. So to provide another view of what a converged network looks like, here is a typical diagram of a scenario. We have intelligent computing taking as many sources of inputs such as vehicle CAN bus, cameras, GPS COM ports connected to other devices in the vehicle, and even to I/O ports to provide all sorts of status inputs. Then that intelligent device decides potentially what to do with that data because it's got intelligent computing. Is there some processing that I can do immediately at the one spot to make decisions about what to do? And then to decide, well, where do I send that data? What is the safest route, or perhaps most cost-effective route to send that data back to a destination? And it could also be that it only chooses to send critical data through. And we see that quite often these days, especially in the bus scenario, where we have a scenario where, in terms in field, a bus may want to know a breadcrumb of GPS. However, only when there's an emergency on board will they start sending video through back to a control room. But we're also seeing that this could be sending that data over DMR, LTE, or even satellite. And the device will even store less important data and transfer it when it reaches a familiar Wi-Fi hotspot. We have quite a few customers looking at that now. So then from there, we have the intelligent backend systems, like I mentioned a minute ago, and even things like the Simoco VRM that can control all in-field devices and systems that utilize that data in areas like telematics, multimodal transport, or ambulance backend, etc. So to provide an outlook on what a typical Converged device looks like, let's give you a bit of an idea of the new Simoco EC830. This device provides 6 types of connectivity, including dual SIM Wi-Fi LTE, dual SIM LTE I should say, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, comms ports, general I/O ports, and even a connection to a DMR network through our own SDM600 radio. And eventually that will also, with a software upgrade, will be P25 Phase 2. It is also planned to be able to work with third-party satellite systems, and we're already doing trials in that area. The thing I want to mention, though, the reason why the model number is EC is because it is actually an edge computer. So it is a Linux-based edge computer running IBM Node-RED to enable fast programming to your customer requirements. So it's really a computer first, and then let's say a comms device sort of second. Similar to the device we had previously, it is the same footprint as a Simoco DMR radio, SDM radio, I should say. So they're actually clicking together and easily work together. However, what you would have also seen is Simoco are going a lot further afield when it comes to this type of product. As you can tell that from what you're seeing in the market, the network convergence and IoT is now becoming a strong part of our future, which is why, as well as developing our own IoT edge computing device, the Velocity 800 series that I've just mentioned, we're taking what we see as a good, better, best approach in the market, and we're developing and also producing and also acquiring companies that can provide the next level as well. So the EC800 series is an excellent mid-spec device, providing solid, cost-effective features. But what we also seen and have seen in this market over the last couple of years is to identify the need for a bigger brother for our EC800 or a range of devices to sort of complete mission critical for high-end data users such as ambulance services. And this is where we've actually recently, well, not so recently, we've teamed up with Telcom for quite a while, but we've acquired them recently. And this is a British company who you may have heard of. And they're actually an engineering company who have for over 20 years had long-standing relationships with both the UK and Irish ambulance services and provided systems for them over that time. And they provide really a lot around data-centric connectivity on their vehicles. So they're only one of 2 vehicles around Kodiak MCPTT on their Android-based vehicle mobile data terminals, and are the only vendor who run a fully data aggregated hardware model where multiple 4G satellite and data streams run simultaneously, eliminating any failover in the event of a network failure. So how it actually works is we're sending multiple streams of data absolutely in parallel. So it's actually duplicated. And when it gets back to the Thorcom server, it basically throws out the duplicated data and then provides the data that's required over to the ambulance. So this is where we see that here in the Australian market, we can actually now provide as well a best approach to our Velocity family of devices. So if we go in a little more detail, just in the state of an ambulance, what you see here is an example of a Thorcom developed Simoco EC900 series. And the picture highlights how the ambulance is actually fitted out with the EC950 with onboard patient monitoring systems, vehicle systems, and more, and utilise, in this case, radio, Wi-Fi, and the multiple LTE streams in parallel, and has been doing so for the last several years. It's smart enough to know what the most cost-effective link is, and will use more of that versus more expensive paths to get the data to its destination. Due to the fact that it's working in collaboration with the Thorcom data aggregation service software, as I mentioned before, it will piece multiple streams of data back together to be presented to the ambulance CAD systems. So overall, that's it from me, and I'd like to thank you for listening to my CC bite-sized presentation today. But as a recap of my main points, they are: LMR will absolutely remain a cost-effective solution and coexist for some time with other technologies such as LTE. Our customers are yearning for new technologies such as LTE, IoT and satellite on top of their existing LMR systems, and it's good to see that the other speakers so far have identified this as well. Converging technologies create a robust, reliable, secure and interoperable broadband communication systems for the future. And our Simoco New Velocity offerings will provide customers with the next generation of technology that is revolutionising mission-critical networks, providing a variety of flexible and connected edge computing devices. Okay, so that's it from my side, and I'm looking forward to some questions at the end of the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Peter. That was really interesting. It's great to see a real-life example of the converged technologies using the ambulance model. That was great, and I'm sure there'll be many questions at the end. I'd like to pass across now to Dion Stevenson. Dion, I know, has been with TAPE for many years, since I've enjoyed talking with him over the last 10 years or so. Dion's got great experience in mobile communications, and he's going to talk about the unified solutions model. Dion, over to you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that introduction, Roger, and great to hear you, Peter, talk about a topic that's certainly passionate for me as well, and also you touched on the sort of the user interface. I think this is my first time presenting at Bitesize or the Critical Comms Forum and things like this, so it's great to be here and part of the family. But what I would like to sort of do for the next sort of 10 minutes or so is just try and be a little bit more holistic in our thinking, and just try and step us outside the technological just for a bit, just to sort of mix it up a little bit. And there's been a lot of good stuff so far. But change really is not a threat. It's an opportunity for us all. And survival is not the goal. Transformation success is. And that's a statement that came from a fellow called Seth Goodwin. And I thought that was very appropriate, because what I'm seeing when I talk to certainly those who are more wise than me is this can be a little bit daunting, this whole concept of radio and cellular and LTE and the mix of Wi-Fi. It can be overwhelming. And I think it's just great to take a step back and just reimagine and rethink this for a bit, and see it as an opportunity for our businesses, for our families and our communities and countries, so and particularly. So when I kind of think about unified and convergence in my theme today, it's really the mix of that communication means. It's that multi-bearer capability, like our unified vehicle has that Wi-Fi, LTE, Ethernet, all of that sort of standard capability that you'd expect in a vehicle box. But what I wanted to jump in on is the infusing of operation. The tech is great, but we need to sort of flip our heads and think about the people that are using this equipment. Some people get excited about the tech, others just don't, and they get frustrated when it doesn't kind of basically work. So we're on that growth cycle, right? And so we need to think about the processes that are in play. And the nice thing about radio, it is a relatively controlled environment. It's one person talks at a time and someone responds, and you throw LTE in that mix and suddenly you can have a two-way conversation, and you've got someone trying to sort of overtalk on the other. So we need to think about operational process as well. We also need to think about the time aspect, how long it takes to do things. You pick up a radio, you press the button, you talk, you're communicating in a few seconds. You pick up a cell phone, it's not so quick and easy. Even if you've got a PDT application, you've still got to unlock the screen, you've got to find the app, you've got to press the button, unless you've got a button on the side, for example. So there's that time aspect that impacts our processes. Then there is the sort of the management of people, right? When we do this whole transition, there's people that are passionate with what they've had, they don't like change. You know, they may feel threatened because they may feel inadequate at one end of the spectrum. You may get others who are just so eager. So you get sort of two environments where trying to operate things in different ways. There's a clash of culture there. So the emotions come part of that. There's that fear, I've talked about that, the fear of change. And there's also that aspect of having to learn and unlearn. And that can be a struggle for some people. So there's that. And all of this kind of impacts on the efficiency, it impacts on the workflows we have, it impacts on our operating procedures. And when we have the radio, the ops are generally have strict, useful guidelines for how you are to talk and have control. And we even have console operators that can override what's going in the field. We take that into the cellular domain. There's so many more options. You have even devices that are uncontrolled, they're unwieldy, people bring their own. You suddenly, as an engineer, you've got not a defined parameter of hardware, you've got the wild west and anything that comes out of any country in the world that you've suddenly got to design and factor in and cater for. And in a mission critical world, that's really risky, right? Because if someone brings a device that hasn't been vetted, we're unfamiliar with it, it could cost us, and worst case, costs lives. So I guess the question is what are we transitioning to and from? You know, we've briefly just touched on my device story. We've got the traditional radios, it's in a vehicle, we've got our radios on our lapel. They're getting smaller, they're getting more capable, they're able to do more. And so because they're able to do more, we need to take some of those processes and adapt them. So once upon a time, we would pick up the microphone, we would request some information and we would get it back verbally. Now, of course, you can pick up your cell phone, you can request that information and get it yourself via some web pages and so forth. And of course, where the challenge comes is where you lose some technology, right? So suddenly you've gone into an area where there is no cellular, and we know in our own Christchurch earthquakes, the cellular network, as great as it was, just got overloaded. People were more interested in their families, and people that really needed to communicate couldn't. It dropped back to the radio networks to provide that lifeline that people needed and that coordination in the ground. So I think we can gain on having multiple devices and multiple methodologies to get that communication back. And I think Peter had a great example there of what they've done in their product range, which is fantastic. And it's really thinking about the end user. There's a plug for you, Peter. So I think outside the radio operator sphere, we also need to step back a bit and go, well, they're not the only users in a radio network. We've got network administrators, we've got technical people, we've got management. So there's tools like our Enable Insight that kind of gives some management tools about what's going on in the network. The technical people use the things like Enable Fleet to do device management, update the configurations, change the configurations on the fly, group dynamics, all that sort of stuff. Then you've got the network administrators who really need to know what's going on under the hood. They're people that we need to factor in to our whole change of our technological footprint. So, you know, no longer are our technical people a radio engineer. They're an ICT guy who thinks they know radio. We all know the worlds are very, very different. An ICT guy will go, what could possibly go wrong? It's a cable, you plug it into the wall, life's good. We know in radio, it's an open-ended system. You move 5 feet and you can have a whole pile of issues. We know how to handle and deal in environments where communications may not be 100% secure or connected. And so we've got to allow for that. So, and management reporting, they don't want to see reports from 5 subsystems. They need to see reporting from 1 system. So we need to think about all of these things when we're transitioning from a pure radio network into a converged environment that includes lots of devices and lots of people. Mouse happy. So as alluded before, we've been heavily reliant on our radio networks to provide voice, and our data was sort of the secondary consideration, and that's now flipped on its head, right? Even DMR, P25, all of that stuff is actually data across the air. It's no longer voice. We have a data medium with services on top. That is greatly different than what we've ever had before. It opens up a world of capability for us, and that has changed what we do and what we can do, but also how we can do it. I mean, if I look at my own daughter, she would rather text because it's quicker to do that than it is to actually call. But I notice when the tensions rise and maybe the relationships and the friends is, going a little bit unwieldy for a bit, they get on the phone, they pick it up and they actually go have a conversation. So there's levels of communications that are going on depending on what's happening and the importance and the urgency of which we need to communicate and the need to get that direct feedback in the methodology of communicating. So I know for myself, I like to talk and a text is quick, but if I pick up the phone, I can spend 10 minutes quite happily chatting along, much to people's amazement. But that has an impact on our productivity. So do we want to encourage voice comms, or we want to encourage the use of status messaging and text messaging? And then we could have a smartphone that we can suddenly have all of these tools around workflow and all of those sorts of things. How does that all play together? So our world has become more than just about connecting people using voice. It's about that information pipe, and it's also about that security, and it's ensuring that all of the things we have play nicely to save a life and to provide that absolute significant care that our medical teams, that our fire people, our police, and even our business people see as critical to their business. But of course, we need to be able to handle what happens if we lose our big data pipe. What happens when we lose our cell phone connectivity? As people start to rely more on cell phones, the use of radio drops back. And then, of course, when you've lost the cell phone, suddenly, how do you use the radio again? There's a loss of familiarity that we need to factor in. There's some training, some exercises that we probably need to do to keep that level of intentionally critical comms functional for where it really, really counts. Because I think at the end of the day, people are going to do what's natural. They're going to hit the emergency button on their lapel or on their radio because they know that's what's going to get them some help. So the last thing I just want to sort of bring up here is, I've got 4 minutes to go, is what it means for us as we transition, and how do we do that seamlessly and create that usability that is seamless. And I guess for us, we have to get ourselves immersed. We have to get ourselves inside our users' heads, no matter where they sit on the radio side or the LTE side. We need to understand how they operate, their limitations, finding questions, what's that brings out the information, even scenario role play. Play this for me. How's it going to work with the new and converged world that we've got? How do we make that duplicity of operations work in our world? How do we take those blind operators and make them now at the forefront of knowledge? And then it's also using the right tech for the right application. It's all very well having all the latest flashy toys, but at the end of the day, it's got to work. And when the police officer presses that PDT button, it just has to go. They have to know it's going to be there. They have to rely on it. And of course, at the front end devices, at least they can pick up the radio and throw it at somebody if it's really, really that important. So it's about trying to walk those users' shoes. It's putting on the different hats, an engineering hat, a console operator's hat, a radio user's hat. What about the money? Is that up front? Is it far away? What about vehicle fit outs? How does that work? How does that cost? What's the impact of that for people? And then technically, I think there is a tendency to sort of have all this flashy stuff. But at the end of the day, we really want to hide the clever stuff. We want operations that are simple for people, operations where it's intuitive, operations where it just makes sense. And in that, we get a sense of reliability. We get a natural way of operating our kit. And training becomes less central. It becomes a supplement because we've designed our products and we've designed what we do to be just right. So then the last aspect of that would be taking our multiple bearers and making that capability right across the board, and from a business perspective, provide that long-term financial benefit to the business owners. So it really is trying to immerse ourselves, trying to find a past partnership with people. And I think in all of this stuff and all of these transitions, we can forget the reason we're doing this. And it is for people, it's about their families, it's about their communities, it's about humanity in general. And we need to keep that in our forefront and how we do that. But on the flip side, of course, it's also feeding our families, and it's also providing employment and all those good things. So when I think about convergence and all of that sort of stuff, I think it is wide-reaching, and we need to reach beyond the technical. We need to reach into the humanity aspect of this and consider that wider picture. Socrates has a quote just to finish up. See if my slide goes. Oh, yeah. Oh. The secret of transition is to focus all your energy on not fighting it or fighting the old, but on building the new. And I think as one of the many manufacturing companies that provides radio, I think there's a responsibility on all of us to go, how are we going to make this work for our worlds, to make it a better place? And as Angus Tate would say, the best is yet to come. Thank you so much for listening to me, and I think I've pulled us back on time, and I'll hand back to you, Roger.
Thanks, Dion. That was really interesting. A great presentation. I was interested in the part where you talked about lots of people looking for information. My experience of critical incidents is limited, but in my limited experience, one of the biggest issues is lots of people calling the one person on the ground asking for a situation report. Hopefully this new technology will make that a little easier in the future. Okay, now we need to move on. Thank you again, Dion, for bringing us back on time. I appreciate that. Our next speaker is Dr. Rob Joyce. Rob is Chief Technology Officer, Nokia for Oceania, and he's going to talk about delivering Australia's critical networks. Thanks, Rob.
Thanks, Roger. And thanks to the previous speakers. I think the definition of critical networks is different to each and every one of us, and maybe that's where I'll start in terms of how Nokia views critical networks, whether they're land-based, whether they're satellite delivered, whether they're over cellular or over private wireless. And I really want to sort of first of all talk about that. What's a critical network? What Nokia in Australia is doing in terms of delivering critical networks as we see them, and then what does the future hold in our view for critical networks? So we've all been locked down for quite some time. You could argue that in some people's eyes, the home broadband, the NBN in this case, is a critical network. It's kept us all going. It's actually probably 90% of us today are either at home or in a remote location connected over a fixed line network across the NBN. So is this a critical network? And I won't answer it, but I think we can all have our own views on that. Another one, for those of you lucky enough to have been locked down with your children, and I've got 3 boys, you can imagine just how critical the school network was. Again, delivered either over the fixed line, over wireless in some cases, over fixed wireless access in NBN's network in the regional areas, or even over 5G in the urban areas over Optus or Telstra or TPG's network. So again, was homeschooling, was that delivered over a critical network, or was the network that delivered that classed as a critical network? This one, for those of you who have been lucky enough to be ill over the lockdown period, you may have had a health consultation over the public network. I did my back in while I was locked down, and I had to speak to the doctor over an iPad laid on the floor in my office. So again, critical networks definitions, are out there for interpretation. And again, finally, was this a critical network? Certainly, the Optus Sport network was critical at the time when for the first time in many years, you can hear it, England were beating Germany. So again, lots of definitions. And finally, a play on words, or is this one? We know that a lot of our business is in the heavy industries of Australia, in the ports, in the mines, and certainly we connect a lot of the Caterpillar infrastructure to networks in order to automate and make those mines and ports a lot safer and a lot more efficient. So the definition of critical networks, of course, I get the point about safety critical and life-saving networks, but there are there's many other definitions that I think we could all look at. If it was economic stability, if it was smart city functionality, then critical networks span all of these. And for me, any network, whether it's private wireless or whether it's public cellular, has this pyramid of requirements, and that's coverage, then capacity, and then capability. First of all, if there's no coverage from a network, whether fixed or wireless, no service, okay? If you do have coverage, then it's all about what can we do with that? Can we get a text message through? Can we do live video? Can we do live video in both directions? And then finally, you will have seen from the way that the operators work here, it sometimes is an arms race and who's got the biggest, who's got the fastest. And for me, that's the sort of the nice to have. That's the cherry on the cake if people want to sort of talk and boast about bit rates. I think what we're talking about today, it's those lower two blocks, essential coverage, and then adequate capacity. What are we doing in Australia to deliver at least the cellular side of things? One of the things that we've been doing with TPG is the 700. We heard earlier when James mentioned some of the spectrum bands. 700 megs is the lowest cellular band currently allocated in Australia, and we've been doing some good work with TPG. You may have seen recently, to try and boost that coverage. I think they went to press last week again that they'd covered 85% of the population in the top 6 cities with their 700 standalone network. And what this means is using a 5G terminal, one of the latest 5G terminals, so either the iPhone or the Samsung or the Pixel, these guys can connect using 5G to the 700 band. So actually, in TPG's network, their biggest coverage layer is now a 5G network, not the LTE network. So again, food for thought when we've heard lots of mention about LTE. Well, 5G is also now beginning to be rolled out into the regional areas and deliver a wide coverage footprint. And I'll come on to the what we can and what we can't do with 5G in a moment. Another example of where we're trying to maximize coverage and minimize cost for the operators is in New Zealand. And there we have what we call this network share. So RCG, the Rural Connectivity Group. And here the 3 CSPs or the 3 mobile operators there have teamed together in order to build a shared network. They've decided that it's not economically viable for each of them to build a network. And in fact, the government has got involved as well. So there's some allocation of government funds to help these 3 mobile network operators roll out into the more rural areas of New Zealand. And that's a project that we're the supplier in terms of the RAN on. Everything needs to be connected. I think, Australia's a big place, and certainly we're not going to cover it by microwave hops. We certainly need to dig fiber, and some of the longest and fastest fibers in the world now are delivered using our optics technology. So again, it's not just about wireless. Certainly we need to have the backhaul in place as well. And then finally, I did mention the shouts. We do obviously have to cater for the requirements to keep Telstra and Ericsson at bay sometimes, and our 2 main networks being TPG and Optus, we certainly help them try and give Ericsson and Telstra a run for the money in terms of the sort of world first and the fastest networks. And here's the proof in point. I think we've got the fastest network at the minute in terms of world records. We got 10 gigs out of an Optus site back in April. Moving more towards industry, I think whilst we do support the CSPs, the mobile network operators, we also support private wireless, and here's some of the companies that we've delivered private LTE into, and that private LTE network infrastructure now is 5G capable. So with some of these partners now, we're beginning to upgrade them from LTE towards 5G, and we can deliver shared network infrastructure. So if they've got for example, a 2100 megahertz band, we can deliver LTE and 5G within the same band and do what we call dynamic scheduling or dynamic spectrum sharing across that band in order to deliver 5G and 4G simultaneously. And we now, you see in the bottom left-hand corner, we now deliver more private wireless networks than we do actually cellular networks. So we as Nokia are really strong in this space, and we look to capitalize on that as we move forward. And I'll mention some of the things that we're doing there. We did hear from James, and so I won't go into detail because I think he did more so, but certainly Nokia through TPG and Optus, two of our biggest customers here in Australia, we're supporting the PSMB POC, and so far so good, I would say. And I know Jonathan Bryan's on the call who's leading this, but certainly we're really proud to be part of this, and we see our place as a cellular network provider with TPG and Optus in terms of supporting and augmenting the PSMB. What does the future hold for critical networks? And again, I use the broader sense. What we've been doing recently is working with a few of our partners on winning some government grants that were out there for 5G use cases. And the federal government had this 5G Innovation Initiative Fund. There was 20 million up for grabs, and I'm pleased to say that Nokia has managed to back about 33% of the projects that have won funds. Some of the ideas that are out there: connected agriculture, connected mining, digital art, remote firefighting drones, both land-based and air-based, and then one probably closer to my heart since I'm leading the project, the connected collaborative robots or connected cobots. And certainly, we see 5G is not just about a faster iPhone, because there's I'll be honest, there's very little difference in the user experience on a 5G smartphone if it's just a sort of handheld phone today. But certainly 5G will unlock when we move to virtual reality. You won't be able to deliver virtual reality glasses using 4G. You will need 5G to do it. And what 5G brings is the higher speed, the lower latency. And so what that means is we can do all sorts of different use cases, both for consumers, but also for industry and also for critical industries. And so what we're doing in terms of trying to understand what people will want to use 5G networks for and what the capabilities of 5G networks are, is we've launched 2 new labs in Australia. The first one we've called the 5G Futures Lab, which is at the UTS Tech Lab in Bodney, Sydney. That's where I'm talking to you from today. And this is our sort of state-of-the-art futures lab. It looks nice. It's aiming at consumer, but it's also aiming at industry. And then we also have our what we call our national 5G industry incubation lab, which is primarily aimed more at industry and more at critical industries. And this is going to be deployed in Adelaide. It's in partnership with the South Australian government, and this will be down at Lot 14. And the initial use cases there are connected trains, connected airports, and then remote power line inspection using 5G. So both these labs will be online. Are online already. The South Australian one coming online towards Christmas. But we look forward to any of you wanting to partner and testing things out. That's what these labs are for. They're not for Nokia just to show things off. They're for Nokia and the wider Australian industry to come in and have a play, kick the tires on 5G, and actually see what we can do with it. So yes, LTE is here today, and yes, if you were going to build a network, you'd probably fall back on LTE today. But 5G is around the corner, and certainly there's lots more things we can do with 5G when we compare it to 4G. These are some of the partners that we're playing with in the lab. And again, I won't dwell on this one. I think just to skip to the summary, I think what we see as Nokia, and what industry sees as a critical network is changing, especially as we start thinking about connected vehicles, delivery drones, etc., being connected to the 5G network in the future. Australia's critical networks will underpin not just society, but certainly our future. We see the investment in NBN and how that paid dividends during the COVID lockdown, and to make sure that we're at the forefront and make sure that we heard before that we have a safe and connected and prosperous society. I think the key is that we all work as an industry and collaborate so that whilst we may deliver the low latency and high bandwidth, somebody else has that critical application that can run up upon our network. And obviously we'd love to test those types of applications here at the UTS lab or down at South Australia with the Industrial Incubation Lab. So that's it from me, Roger. I will hand back. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much indeed, Rob. That was really, really interesting. And I think it's a great point. We often get very excited by public safety, and rightly so. But the critical networks that serve our industrial base and hopefully in the future our agricultural base are at least as important and at least as critical to their users. Moving on now, one of the things, I'm an RF guy by background, get very excited by RF. But of course, there's more to a critical network than just the radio part. And I'm going to turn over now to Ranjan Bhagat to talk about a critical linchpin in critical communications, and that is the control room. Ranjan.
Hey, thanks, Roger. Great presentations earlier today. And I like to say that I don't think I drew the short straw as I'm coming up at the end, but it logically makes sense because we were led off by James representing the end user. And then we had Peter and Dion and Rob sort of talking about LMR and LTE, and at Zetron, we sort of bring it all together. So let's begin. And I just realized my slides are not moving forward. Yep, I do have control. Yep, certainly not moving forward or back.
Thomas, have you given control?
Yeah, I do have control.
I think maybe click in the screen and then try the arrow.
Yeah, we'll try that. I did it. Perfect. Thanks again. All right, let's get going here. So look, from my perspective, I'm looking at, we've got about 87 people in the audience here, and most people know LMR really well because it's a pretty mature industry. I want to talk a little bit about public safety broadband, and I won't talk too much about it because a lot's already been said. In essence, if you look at the classical definition of broadband, right? It means a wider bandwidth data transmission, example NBN. But for public safety, what it's really come to mean is much more. It's the applications that the users can expect, and that's voice, data, and video, and MCX that you will hear a lot about very shortly. So again, you heard this earlier today. We all know LMR today is considered the most reliable voice link for first responders. And if you were to ask generally somebody who doesn't know a whole lot about, they'll talk about broadband and LTE as enhancing the user experience for high-speed data. And we, of course, Zetron deal with all these entities. And the question that's asked is it really LMR versus broadband? Is it really a transition? And the answer is both entities that we deal with, LMR companies or broadband LTE vendors, LMR companies, great maturity in understanding end user requirements, private networks, voice, broadband, excellent experience historically with commercial networks, and so on. The reality is they're both asking the same questions. The LMR company, you heard earlier, they're looking at how are they going to leverage broadband? How will they work with broadband partners? How will they coexist with broadband solutions? And similarly, the broadband players are asking the same question. And so the answer is it's really not LMR versus broadband, it's a journey. And we'll talk a little bit about that. All right. Well, we are a global company, so I figured because we are dealing with this experience globally, give the users or the audience there a little bit of what's happening in the rest of the world with MCX. So North America, as you all know, AT&T has the FirstNet contract, and they recently disclosed they're at the 95% of their band class 14 build out. There's, according to them, there's about 15,000 agencies that have signed up, 2.8 million connections, and 3 million users was considered the high water mark. So the answer is, I guess the rollout's going very well. And one of the reasons is that the user base has extended beyond what was originally intended, which was, of course, for public safety, but now it's being extended to military and other users as well. So, and with IoTs coming along as well, the potential addressable market is expected to exceed 10 million users, with MC data and video to be launched next. So all in all, lots to be learned from that experience, especially for us here in Australia, but going very well. Now, having said that, while AT&T has the FirstNet contract, it's not a monopoly in terms of MCPTT and MCX services. There are other telcos, Verizon, Southern Link, that have launched similar services, and it's great to see competition. In Canada, again, they're going to be using the telecom carrier model, a little bit different than the US, and we expect to see commercial launch of MCX services very soon. Our neck of the woods, Asia Pac, we all know South Korea's SafeNet is actually quite progressed, primarily been dealing with Korean companies on that, and they're expecting to be largely completed in the next couple of years. So good on them. Heard a lot about our own public safety mobile broadband network here earlier from James and others, and it seems to be going very well. I haven't seen a specific timeline, but sounds like there's a really great plan, probably next 3 to 5 years. But we all know one thing, and we've learned this from the other people's experiences, and given our own challenges with our size of the country and where our customers are, certainly with Australia, one size fits all isn't going to work, and that's pretty well understood now. Across the Tasman, New Zealand, NGCC, look, it's been open for bidders since Jan 21st, and that's in the process of, I guess, being planned and built out over the next few years as well. And we'll hear more about that as it progresses. India is another one where they have a similar program in the next, perhaps 5 to 7 years. And we heard a little bit about this earlier from Rob, but there is certainly some greater adoption of private LTE that we are seeing in our region here, a lot with some rail-related projects. And as you would all know, with their FRMCS, which is linked with 3GPP as well, and expected to eventually replace the 2G-based GSMR technologies, there is some momentum there, and the resources market as well. With EMEA, again, won't get into a lot of detail. It was alluded to earlier, countries have plans, but there are being delays that are being caused for good reasons. So I'm going to move on very quickly to some of the good things that we are seeing. The standards bodies have been excellent. They are influencing product development cycles for vendors such as us, certainly increasing market-based competition and choice, and most importantly, defining interoperability. You heard that a lot earlier. And typically what we're seeing here is once the standard gets released, it takes about 3 years for commercially viable solutions. 3GPP, hats off to them. They've been fabulous. And the only point I'll make here is with all the releases, 3GPP release 16, which is the latest set of fully ratified standards for the MCX solutions, is actually being widely accepted by industry as well. And you will expect to see a lot of solutions, vendor solutions coming out compliant with that. In fact, recently ETSI concluded their plug test. We were participants in that as well. And we were amazed. There was about, I think, 30 odd entities. We tested with quite a few of them. And again, great results. Release 17 coming. You'll hear a lot more about that in the future. But I would say for the purposes of building out robust solutions, Release 16 has already set the platform for us. And there are other LMR standard bodies prior to 3GPP that are working very well on this. The TIA in North America, traditionally known for P25 standards, but they're working on IWF solutions, focusing on CSSI and DFSI for connectivity, NIPSTIC, and TCCA, our own organization that has hosted this. They're working on a control room implementation guide project that we are participating in, and it's great to see that based on real use cases, which makes us pretty excited. So from a command and control perspective, right, we're the intelligent glue, as I said, we bring it all together. And interoperability is going to be key. It was always key earlier with voice, and it's going to be no different for the services that broadband and LMR will bring, and primarily related to data. So the focus is going to continue to be to deliver information from a centralized information hub to the right resources, accepting your broadband media, pictures, video, through a common gateway, irrespective of source, transforming that into some actionable decisions. And lastly, it's got to be seamless between the different agencies, certainly within a particular country. So the tips that we give for anyone, if you're an end user who's looking at building blocks for how do we leverage this, is don't manage them separately. You know, partner and integrate, and this applies to vendors as well. Certainly, open standards are always the best. You heard a lot about P25, DMR, TETRA, great standards. They've done very well. 3GPP doing exceptionally well. And that will ensure interoperability for you if you're an end user or if you're a vendor building those solutions. Use cases, huge. Focus on, I think I heard Dion say that, focus on solutions versus technology. Great examples of use cases earlier with the AMBOs and the first responders. And again, that's what the end users need to be thinking about. Costs, of course, important. Coverage, again. The last bullet here is related to managing information overload. With the advent of more data, we need to be careful about what it means for the first responder and the dispatchers. And I'll talk about that in the next slide. So we won't thank Zuckerberg for this, but the metaverse is here. But the reality is the national public safety broadband networks are in their infancy. And from our perspective, broadband will bring greater mobility and access to data. We recognize that, but it can overwhelm the traditional comm centers as well. So we do need to think about how to manage that. Again, with data comes more data privacy and security issues. So got to think about that as well. And the reality is, again, the LMR technology solutions will gain efficiencies. You heard a lot about that earlier as well from Peter and Simiko and Sapura as well. And again, we summarize by saying these technologies will coexist in the near to midterm. Certainly, depending on the investment cycles, if somebody has invested in a P25 DMR TETRA network in the last few years, it's unlikely they will switch right away. But if somebody's on an analog network, they might skip a generation. So use cases will drive the increased adoption of broadband. One of the examples that we see is assistive artificial intelligence. And I say assistive, meaning things that will make the control room operator smarter, will augment human judgment in terms of real time to protect life and property, all in a transparent manner. So today, interoperability is happening. The key is to make it all happen seamlessly. And that's what we're all working towards. You heard that earlier, and we strive to keep working towards that. With that, I guess I'll just say that we do have a white paper on interoperability that's available on our website. Go have a look, and I'll be happy to take questions. And thank you again to the organizers for the opportunity, as well as to my peers who made some great presentations. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Ranjan. Absolutely no question that interoperability is key to our future. and that, of course, as you pointed out, is based on standards. I'll now hand over to Kevin Graham. Kevin's ACCF Director and CEO-elect of the TCCA, and he'll talk about some of the developments in standards and the new releases. Kevin, over to you.
Good morning, good afternoon, and thank you for the kind introduction, Roger. It's with pleasure I am able to join the session today, and I'm also very humbled to have been elected as the new TCCA CEO. I actually started that role in parallel with the existing CEO last month, and I've been very fortunate to have had 20 years working as a director and the founding chairman of the ACCF. Today, I plan to share some topics on the roadmap for mission and business critical communications and the way that the TCCA, ACF, and our global members, and also our global affiliate organisations are organised, and some of the actions that have taken place recently, and what are some of the priorities over the next 12 months. But just a few more words about the TCCA. As you all know, we had our roots in the land mobile radio digitisation and standardisation over 25 years ago. And that started with the original development of the TETRA standards. Ever since, the TCCA has developed and enhanced our collective expertise in the requirements of critical users, and now apply this to the critical broadband world. We've worked closely with ETSI through a long-standing cooperation agreement that started back in the early days of TETRA and continues on with the enhancements going on in that narrowband standard. And more recently with 3GPP, where TCCA has been a market representation for critical communications ecosystem. In fact, the TCCA and its members were the first one recognised in this area by 3GPP. From narrow broadband to critical broadband, our members come from all around the world and we've seen that TCCA has now become a focal point to channel collective knowledge, innovation, consultation, and most importantly, to ensure that we have, efficient ways to progress the standards and the technologies in conjunction with industry. We have a number of really cherished partnerships that have been cultivated over the many years, and this is just a few of those. Both in the two-way fashion, the regional forums that work as local chapters of the TCCA are extremely important in channeling information of regional interest, regional priority into the TCCA and partner network to assist us in our work, both in the enhancements of the standards and the prioritisation in which we go about that. Just a quick pictorial just to remind everyone about the organisations and peers working in both the narrowband standards and the broadband. So ETSI is responsible for the standards for both TETRA and DMR, while TIA in the US is responsible for the P25 narrowband standards. And work is continually going on with all these three standards and enhancements to ensure these standards and the technology meet end user functionality going forward. So the broadband is completely undertaken by 3GPP, and as everyone knows, 3GPP has been responsible for the cellular standards right from GSM through to the current implementations of both 4G and the significant work going on in the 5G space. I mean, one part of this that's extremely important for the mission critical functionality, both in terms of PTT, video, and data, is the work that needs to go on in implementation of the interworking function that has been defined through the 3GPP standards with the other parts of the ecosystem that will help enable the interoperability and conformance of the various wireless bearers. I put this slide up just to show you, if you are not aware, what are some of the relationships between all of the entities that are engaging with 3GPP. For those that may not be aware, there are 6, or actually 7, 2 out of Japan, what are called operational partners. These are made up of standards development organisations that are relevant in these regions. It's interesting to note here as well that Africa, Latin America, Russian Federation and Australasia have no SDOs presently interacting with 3GPP. So companies and entities in these regions have chosen one of the 7 organisations in which they can have representation. This slide shows also the market representation partners, of which TCCA is one. You have the 5G projects as well as the SDOs. And I've depicted with the thick blue arrows, the paths where representation is provided to 3GPP. And these blue arrows cover all of the requirements from both consumer end use cases through to use cases and representation for various verticals that exist and that are emerging that need to be catered for by the standards. And I think, the important point to note here is the thin blue line, as I would like to call it, is the thin blue line of mission critical functionality. And we shouldn't forget that, against all of the other proponents involved in the standards, we need to punch above our weight as a mission critical, business critical, collective stakeholder liaison to ensure that the programs for critical standards development are in fact heard and carried forward through 3GPP. We're competing against a number of very heavy-duty colleagues, and we need to make sure that our mission-critical functionality is well represented, collected and prioritised, and elaborated effectively into the standards bodies. This is what I call the mission critical lasagna, the common ecosystem layers that are involved in all of the work that we are attempting to undertake with our members and our affiliates, both from a standards level, an industry implementation, system implementation level, the network operator environment, the applications that need to be delivered to support the use cases, the operational procedures that are involved with both agencies and other mission and business critical users from the various verticals. And on top of this is the government involvement, both from a legal and regulatory perspective. And this includes the harmonisation and equitable access to spectrum to deliver this capability to the critical users within our jurisdictions. I think a number of of us have seen this type of chart before, but you know, we are now seeing through real life experience the pathfinding projects like UK, South Korea, where they are planning a total trend move to LTE. We're seeing a number of countries where they are looking at a managed approach to transition based on the fact that they have potential end of technical life for some of their existing national PPDR networks, whether it's technical end of life or economic end of life of that. They are considerations in terms of the timescales they have for transition and or augmentation of broadband capability. And obviously the rail industry is one that is on a very tight timeline, given there's expected obsolescence of the GSMR rail network technologies across the world. TCA working groups are the main drivers of our work. They are open to all qualifying members, and we encourage the widest possible participation. In many cases, we work through project-specific task forces. We also have country and regional specific forums that focus on specific geographic requirements. And obviously ACCF in Australasia is one of those examples. I'd like to just cover a few areas in which we are devoting significant resources at the current time, particularly around our work in the critical broadband space. The Critical Communications Broadband Group have had many members contributing to a number of tasks recently. And a number of guides and papers have been published. And we have some more white papers on 5G, 450 megahertz, and broadband device procurement that will be published shortly. A couple of others are in finalisation, along with many more that are contemplated. Some of those task forces that have been formed relate to 5G satellite communications and cybersecurity work that we're attempting to start that focuses in on the mission critical elements and mission critical network areas of interest. Ranjan mentioned the 3GPP release program. We're currently working on release 17 and work has commenced on formulating the requirements for release 18. And you can see the proposed dates for the work in these particular areas. So where are we heading from current work on release 17 and work commencing on release 18? In general, we have enhancements that are being worked on in terms of both coverage, capacity, and other enhancements. And these include ensuring that the work that's been done with mission critical standardization in 4G is translated to the 5G domain. Importantly, there's work being done around the enhancements for the future rail communications requirements, around content and media servers, file distribution, and particular areas of interest for public safety, like the isolated UTRAN for public safety. We're also working on common features with other 5G services, such as satellite 5G access. There's work around drones, multicast, unicast, and broadcast capability. And as mentioned previously, device-to-device and side link are important attributes that are required by particularly our first responder users. Another area that was touched on was around open service APIs, generic API platforms for all services, and also in respect to broadband user devices. Some time ago, TCCA was involved through members from our user community and government user community to look at how they established a more formalised way of working. TCCA sponsored that original work a few years ago, and recently the Legal and Regulatory Working Group was established. And this was to focus on common legal and regulatory issues arising from the evolution of voice-centric narrowband to information-centric mission-critical services. So at the moment, the working group is for government operators in the CEP member countries in Europe, but they have indicated they may engage with other government operators. And I think this is a really good and interesting and topical area across many jurisdictions. And operators cannot participate due to some of the confidentiality reasons of the information exchanged. If anyone is interested in knowing more about this, they're more than welcome to contact me. I know some of the representatives of this are quite willing to share non-confidential information around the work that they're doing in terms of legal and regulatory to pave the way for their public safety mobile broadband strategies. Looks like I think we're right now. One further important area that is being undertaken with heavy TCCA involvement is around all of the testing and conformance. Now, I'd just like to ensure people are aware of the sort of three layers of testing that are essential for ensuring that solutions do in fact meet the standards, in which case that a conformance testing regime is being put in place or has been put in place to ensure that any implementation under test does actually conform to the standard or the reference implementation of the standard. Secondly, as we've been used to within the digital LMR market, whether that's TETRA, DMR, or P25, there's been interoperability testing set up to ensure that two or more implementations actually work together. And then the next layer is to ensure that there is, in terms of performance testing, that the implementations are under test actually meet the core criteria and key performance indicators, whether that's call setup, delay, latency, voice quality, etc. And the TCCA is involved in essentially 4 programs. One is the MCX plug test program that has been organised via ETSI, that was mentioned by Ranjan, and there's extensive involvement in that from industry, vendors, to ensure that the implementations and their capability against the standard are closely matching. And more importantly, to make sure that if there are any ambiguities in the standard, that these are flushed out and improved and enhanced going forward. There's also been a program set up with the Global Certification Forum. For those that don't know, GCF's involved in all of the device certification for, if you like, the a viable certification program against which current and future devices could be certified for mission critical functionality. There's a mission critical testing as a service platform, which is a program that is due to be completed middle of next year. It was funded out of NIST, PSCR program, and is a cooperation of a number of partners to deliver a test platform that could evolve into a testing as a service. And in parallel, we're working with GSMA on how do some of these conformance, interoperability, performance testing translate into field test cases. So I think, you know, the important message from all of this and the work that's been done globally and the participation by global members through TCCA and their peers in the US is that we must make sure that we cooperate on a regional level. We must make some effort to come together to start to ensure we are channeling our requirements into the SDOs, the market representation partners like TCCA, to ensure that the priorities for mission critical through the value chain are being realised and realised as quickly as possible. And I really implore all of those that are on the call from our region to consider how they might be able to contribute to this effort and support the effort of those that are already contributing. It's astounding the amount of horsepower that has been thrown at this work from both the end users and the industry. It's amazing. And there's more work that needs to be done. So I would really ask if you're interested in this area that you get in contact with the ACCF or the TCCA and see how we can work together and how you can benefit also from the information sharing that goes on within the organisation and our peers and partners at the moment. I'd just like to quickly, well, sorry. Let me just quickly outline some of the valuable resources available to those that may be listening. Clearly through the TCCA and the ACCF websites, we've got a lot of publicly available resources from news, white papers, guides. There's a number of webinar recordings from past events that have been conducted. Program. And there's an amount of information that's member-only information. You get access and participation to the TCCA working groups and some of our task forces. You can get involved in the TCCA and partner programs, and that includes sharing some of the information and observer programs and others that are part of our ETSI plug tests, the IOP work, the certification work, the mission critical services work we're doing. And obviously,
Kevin, I'm going to call time on you. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's fine. There's other references here to the events coming up, and I know Roger's going to speak a bit more about the Comms Connect event coming up in March, where there's a very useful program being organised. Clearly, there's other bite-sized events coming up. Have a look at these links. And another key event is the next Critical Comms World in June 2022 in Vienna. We're also got training programs that are being prepared for delivery as we did with LTE programs during 2021. So thank you all for your attention. I look forward to your support and your engagement in my new role as TCCA CEO.
Thanks very much, Kevin. Really appreciate that. There's a vast wealth of resources that are there. And as you correctly pointed out, we put on this bite-size event to compensate for the fact that there was no Comms Connect on in November as normal. The good news is that the Comms Connect will be running in March 2022. ACCF will be conducting a town hall as part of that event to feed into the event to explore further critical communications in Australia and New Zealand and around the world, and that will be a full afternoon. But now it's time to move on to questions and answers, and I'll just run through. We've got a number of questions. The first is for Peter Hudson, actually. Peter, can you comment on some of the hurdles that ESN encountered as the pioneer in using commercial broadband operators for public safety?
Yes and no. We have some NDAs in place, which I have to respect. I think in all honesty, ESN started out probably too quickly. It also started before standardisation actually started happening. So they started down a proprietary route, which was known at the time. It was a conscious decision. So there've been quite a lot of, I think, resets and sort of re-looking at what they do. But they have, I guess, as part of that process, being a little bit ahead at times of the actual MCX standardization, which of course has caused a few problems along the way, and they are genuinely trying to get a service that is as good as the airwave network it's going to replace, which is quite a tall order. It's a good network, so I think and user expectations are really high. The bar is high for what they're trying to do. So they've got a number of, if you like, sort of hurdles to get over, but they are also hitting sort of genuine issues. So things like performance of E/No-Bs, etc., when actually trying to set up group calls very quickly, are all things which they're now running into, which are being raised back within 3GPP, etc. So they're practical problems around using, if you like, commercial equipment in a slightly different way. So numbers of problems around that, but it's largely, I think, because they did start very early, and they've probably been a little bit ahead of the curve in some cases in actually finding some of the issues.
Yeah, I think that's very true, and hopefully we get the chance to learn from some of those things. Thanks, Peter. Yeah, I appreciate you managing the balance between NDA and non-NDA.
No problem.
The next question is for Peter Scarlata. Peter, you mentioned IoT as being a key and emerging part of critical communications infrastructure. Can you elaborate a bit on some of the examples where that's being used today?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got quite a few examples at the moment. So our new released ECI 800, which has only been out a month, by the way, is already being used by an Australian fire agency who uses a tablet, for example, to display the location of their firefighters, which is completely interfaced with P25. So it's the combination of P25 and we say LTE there. Internationally, as I mentioned also through my presentation, the Irish and the UK ambulance services use the 4Com home device, where they're completely taking data back from all the items or the technology inside the ambulance and piping that back through to the CAD systems through multiple streams. So there's just a couple of things there, and there are plenty more examples.
Perfect. Thanks very much indeed. James, the next one's for you. You mentioned that there were opportunities for industry to get involved with the Connectivity Innovation Centre that you set up. Can you elaborate a bit about how that's done and who to contact?
Yeah, look, Roger, at the moment we're sort of in the throes of establishing the engagement sort of approach. So we've just, as I said, announced the leads, or the joint leads for that. And we can come back to this forum with some more detail on, the best way to engage on those problem statements. So I'm happy to send that out to this group and the attendees here today in terms of the best formal way to tap into that.
Oh, that's great. That'll be really good. Thank you very much.
No problem.
The next question is for Dion. Hang on a second. Yeah, Dion. People were interested in your discussion on user training and how we enabled users to function in a fallback situation when the rich data feeds that we're getting from some of the broadband services are lost.
Sure, there was a couple of questions there, Roger, for me. So I'll pick up on the first one first, the fibre security one. I think that is massive. I think we're seeing more and more the need to secure the data as it goes across and the air, but also more particularly as it goes across the internet, as we use that as a bit of a backbone for moving data around and having things in the cloud. So, and then there is the whole privacy aspect, which is legislated in many countries around the world. So I think it's a big issue, and I think it would be unwise not to give some strong thought around that space. So with the user training, I think when it comes to that, it's a great topic, right? And I think repetition is the key. I think when you're talking about users and how you enable those users to function, it's keeping that information in front of them regularly. It's having them use it, almost forcing them to use it in scenarios every now and again, just to ensure that they kind of know what to do when they need to fall back, so those operating procedures are not lost. That would be my suggestion there. Thanks.
Thanks very much. A question here really for all panellists. I think for all the presentations, coverage and resilience were recurring themes. So what do the panellists see as the emerging technologies in coverage extension? This is open to anyone to go for. Otherwise, I'll pick someone.
Yeah, look, I think I can mention one thing. For example, look, spoke of a few solutions there. One is our DMR coverage extender, where that actually enables through a DMR network, if you have a portable, it can bounce off a mobile and a vehicle and get back to the network. So that's been out for about a year now and is doing really well. And of course, the extension by LTE and satellite, as we mentioned earlier, we also have technology for that, as do others. Where now you can actually drive out of a radio network and the system will automatically flip over and go through to LTE. So that is now available.
Fabulous. Any other people want to comment on that at all?
Yeah, I can say I think I agree with those sentiments. I think the key thing we've got to consider is actually keeping the mission critical link. So actually the quality of service that users expect across whatever extensions happen to come. So I think people talk about Wi-Fi, satellites, various other things. I think in all possible, but we're just going to be very, very cautious that the actual quality of service you get across all these different links and the intervening hops actually does provide the real service the users want.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah,
and Robbie, I think just some of the spectrum bands that we've been looking at and seen getting hot now, the sort of 410, 450, maybe not in Australia, but certainly elsewhere in the world, is sort of coming back into play. And I think that really, if it's going to be terrestrial-based coverage, clearly 410, 450 is key to that. If it's going to be, and that probably is going to be augmented by satellite. I think we heard mention of that, and we're very keen on some of the players, especially the ones that will or claim they'll be able to deliver a 5G signal from space direct to an existing handset. And I think that really sort of, negates the need for new satellite dishes on the ground, such as we see with Starlink. But certainly there's all sorts going on out there, but I think it's going to be a mix of terrestrial and satellite in the next 10 years for sure.
Yeah.
Roger.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say the same, that it's, I kind of maintain there's no one size that fits all unless you're a very small operator. But it just sort of echoing what's already been said, we do also see some greater emergence of non-terrestrial networks over time. An example of that, of course, is what 3GPP is doing. In release 17, they actually will have some standards to actually manage the integration of that, the interoperability of NTRs with the terrestrial cellular technologies as well. So that's a good indication of what the standard bodies are thinking anyway. So if you just go add, as I said, you add the rule of once the standard gets ratified, plus 3 years to when the market can expect robust solutions, you're probably maybe 5 years away from something like that.
Yeah, I think that's right. Some of these satellite applications, I guess, are particularly applicable for where latency isn't the major issue. I'm guessing, Rob, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, what we're seeing from from some of the results from Starlink. I mean, they're getting down to sort of 40 milliseconds, and they claim they can get lower than that. And for most applications, 20 milliseconds, 40 milliseconds is probably more than enough, in terms of the cost coverage compromise. You're not going to want to be operated on by a Da Vinci robot in the middle of the outback via a satellite link, but certainly, if it's driving a road train across Australia, 40 milliseconds, 20 milliseconds is probably doable if there's some onboard sort of localized sensing and safety measures as well. So, yeah, it's clearly you can't change the laws of physics, but yeah, for sure, many applications could fall within that envelope of 20 to 40 milliseconds, I think.
Thanks. The next question's again for all panelists. It's very interesting. It's come from Cologne, from an old buddy of mine, Barry Hack. So Barry must be up very late, I think, or up very early, one way or another. The question he's asked is really interesting. What he's saying is, if we assume that we keep narrowband services running for the next few years, why are we bothering with LTE? Why don't we just make the leap to 5G? Don't know who wants to pick that one up.
To have a go at that one if you want. I think I don't think it's one or the other from our perspective. When we talk about broadband, we certainly we're talking about building on the existing sort of generations of technology, and in some instances today that's still going to include 3G. But definitely as we move forward, that foundation becomes 4G and yeah, no question in the future 5G. There's definitely some considerations around which generation supports specific standardised feature sets that may be of interest for mission critical communications. But ultimately, at the end of the day, I think we are talking about building on top of the existing or the generations that exist, and then leveraging the specific version that may have the feature set that a customer or end user is interested in.
Yep.
So it's not binary in my view.
Yep.
Roger, I would sort of echo that again. I agree with James. It's not sort of one or the other. And one of the things I alluded to in my presentation is it depends. The market forces will decide this, but also will depend on where that individual client is on the current investment cycle. And I gave an example of, if you look at the classic, LMR progression, right? Analog networks, digital standards came along, and some people went P25, some TETRA, some DMR, and then LTE, 4G, and there's 5G, 5GS, and so on. And in some cases, if you're a huge client, but for some reason you haven't migrated from analog to digital, you might skip a generation and go straight to LTE, and in other cases. So I think it's not to answer the question of our friend in Cologne, who I don't know what time it is there, but hats off to him for staying up this late. I think you will see in some cases clients will do that, and again, it will be based on their individual requirements.
Yeah.
I think it's also worth saying, I agree, it's not one or the other. It's probably one then the other, or a combination of both. But we've got to be careful that everyone's not chasing jam tomorrow. So the 4G standards for LTE are just about stable, and a lot of the holes are fixed. 5G, the ink just drying on the paper. If we always say it's the next thing, then we never actually achieve it. So we have to put a stake in the ground, start somewhere.
Yeah. Dion, I'm not sure how much you can say, but New Zealand's going down a similar track, sort of using what's available today and building on it for the future. Is that correct?
That is absolutely right. And I think in the New Zealand space, you're at the mercy of the national providers, to be fair, and available spectrum. And I'd also suggest that I think in Europe, while there might be a population density that would support an LTE-only sort of infrastructure, I think out in New Zealand and Australia and the US, that's just not commercially feasible. So I think that the whole convergence is going to have a bigger part for us out on this side of the world.
Yeah. Anybody else want to comment before we come to a close? All right. Well, I think it just remains for me to firstly remind everybody that Melbourne Comms Connect, 8th to 10th of March, we'll continue this discussion, and there are what I've already seen, many exciting presentations at that event, so I hope to see you all there in person. Secondly, please consider joining the ACCF, because it's through the ACCF that you can get this kind of information on a consistent and regular basis and know what's happening around the world and be showcased to the world. And lastly, to really go through and thank, firstly, everyone for attending and spending the 2 hours online. And we peaked, I think, at 101 attendees, which is absolutely fantastic. And to thank James, Peter Scarlata, Dion, Rob, Ranjan and Kevin for their time in presenting. So thanks very much to everybody, and see you in March at Comms Connect.